Building Men is brought to you by Finish the Race Apparel, FTRapparel.com, the creators of all things building men, and by Become Stronger Industries, become-stronger.com, the creators of handmade steel maces, hammers, and other badass equipment.
Like any emotion, grief is something that needs to be completely felt all the way through. Holding on to it, bottling it up, creating tension around it is just going to create conflict in your life. It's going to create negative consequences both in your body and in your experiences with your community, with your relationships. So allowing yourself to be with it.
You're listening to the Building Men podcast with Dennis and Anthony Miralda, brothers on a mission
to help you become the strongest version of yourself, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically.
Morning, brother.
Good morning.
So we are recording this on a Tuesday morning. Yesterday was a challenging day. I was at a funeral yesterday, and I'm going to start my little pre-game discussion talking about the funeral that I was at. The funeral was the gentleman that passed. He was 42 years old. So I'll be 45 Thursday when we're recording this. Yeah. I'll be 45 on Thursday, so it really hit home with me. And the funeral was held in a Catholic church in Newark, Delaware. And as I'm there, we grew up in a Catholic family. So there was a part of me that I went back to this spot in my mind growing up in a Catholic church. It just brought me back to that time in my life, first of all. And the one thing I wanted to discuss first was just the ceremonial aspect of death. And it's a weird way to start this off, but it helped the family heal. It helped the friends heal going through this ceremony, this Catholic ceremony. And I'm not going to make this into a spiritual thing about religion or about Catholicism, the way that we were raised. But I started to think about, the way that we handle grief in general. And I had a couple specific memories going back to my childhood. So Dad's dad, he was Nicholas Miralda. We talked about our last name, Miralda. This was the one, Nicholas Miralda. He died when I was in second grade. So I was 7 years old, something like that. Mm-hmm. And I remember Dad taking me and Tara into the backyard and kneeling down and telling us that, we called him Pop-Up, that Pop-Up had died. And I remember feeling numb, and it's one of the first core memories that I have, I would say. But I also remember thinking how Dad didn't show any emotion. There was no emotion associated with the grief. This was his dad that died. And then I started to think, fast forward, it was a long period of time from when Pop-Up died until we had another death in the family when I was like 27, 28 years old. And then they just became, every couple months, there was someone in our family that had passed. And it was really, I really started to think about grief in a deep way during that time. But I remember thinking about how Dad processed grief. And it was a real significant part of my journey in masculinity was he didn't feel into it. It was almost like he got angry.
He was always pissed. Yeah, he never. There was other things that would make him mad more than usual when someone would die. I knew that someone wasn't doing well or something was happening because he would be angry, viscerally angry at something going on. And that's who we look to like emulate. So what I took away from that was that I couldn't show emotion, especially in public.
Right.
Like think about how many funerals we've been through with our family.
Yes.
And we had to be there and be stoic and couldn't show in that moment when we were there, when everyone's expressing themselves, we weren't. Like we couldn't. We didn't know how to, because that's who we followed growing up all the time.
And Mom was a mush. Mom was very emotional, which was interesting as well. Just the dichotomy between the way that Dad processed it, and he would get angry. He would almost pick fights with Mom.
With Mom when she had someone pass away that was close to her. And then think about us looking at that as a viewing that from an outsider's perspective, and we're watching not only how he handles grief, but also how he handles other people handling grief.
Right.
So now he doesn't even know how to be open and how to be there. Like, it would be one thing if he was like, I'm going to be this for your mother. It was like, no, what is she doing? Why is she acting this way? Like, this is and then he would get mad at her for random things.
Yeah.
It was.
And as I look back, I understand he didn't understand how to process grief. So the emotion that he was feeling, because he wasn't able to truly get in touch with that emotional side of himself, was being angry.
Yeah.
He knew that there was something bottled up inside of him. He didn't know how to get in touch with it, and so it manifested itself as him being angry. I want to go back and give Dad a hug and be like, it's okay. You can feel into this right now. You know, like
Robin Williams and Matty David.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
It's not your fault.
Good Will Hunting. It's not your fault. Because the way that he was taught to process grief was in a toxic way, I would say, as I look back at it. And I felt really sad yesterday thinking about that. And as I went through those funerals that our family, it was just a really tough stretch of, maybe 6 or 7 years that we had gone through. And typically I was the one who was up on, giving a eulogy in front of a group during that time. I was comfortable public speaking, so I was the one up there, and I had to, be strong, but be able to, I showed emotion very deeply during that time. I would choke up during the time and try to power through those speeches that I would give for during the viewings or during the actual funeral itself. But it made me think about it yesterday as I'm at this funeral. At the very end, the priest basically said two things that stuck with me that I wanted to start off the episode today with. One was about grief, and he said, grief is a weird emotion. It is the weirdest emotion. People that are, and the older sister of the guy who passed basically was just in that mode where I'm going to go. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. Just kept checking things off and wasn't truly feeling it. Like it was filling that numbness. Yes. Yeah. It was just, you could just see that she was numb going through it. And some people were really breaking down and feeling into the emotion. But he said grief is weird in the way that you might not feel it today or tomorrow. It might be in a year from now, 2 years from now, but know that we're here for you to fully process it if you need us to. It was pretty cool for him to say that. So that was one thing that I thought of. And the second thing was, which is how I'll start off the episode today, at the end, the family and friends were there, and he said, tell me a word that you would use to describe the gentleman who had passed. Give me a word. When you think of him, what word would you use? And the first word that I heard was curious. And then someone said adventurous. Someone said magnetic. Someone said caring. And I started to think about that idea and internalize it for myself. If I were in a casket, what words would I want the audience to use when they were speaking about me? The people that were there showing their love and respect for me, honoring my life, what would be the words that I would want them to use as they were talking about me? And if those are the words that I want those people to use, am I embodying that with how I am showing up on a day-to-day basis? Is that how I'm living if I want people to say these words about me? Or even like
the words they come up with, is that who you want to be known as? What you think they would describe you right now, is that who, if you were just like honest about who you are and how people would talk about you, is that how you even want to be described as? Or do you need to work on things to be this person that you want to emulate?
So it's interesting that as you said that, I almost want to ask people what words would they use to describe me. I would use certain words to describe myself or what I would want to be known as. I want to ask friends and family, just be totally honest with me. What words would you use to describe me if you had that opportunity?
Yeah, that's Don't worry about my feelings at all, right?
But just
no, I know what you mean.
But just am I in alignment with how I want to be viewed in that spot? And if I'm not, if people are saying the word douchebag,
right?
And I'm not on the right path.
Fuck.
So you can't use that one now.
Okay.
So I will use that as an opportunity to segue to our guest today. On the Building Men podcast, we have John Perez Cruz. He is the CEO of Rising Warrior. He is a guide that helps transition veterans to regain their sense of purpose and create an authentic community. He is also the host or the co-host of the Rising Warrior podcast. Welcome to the Building Men podcast. JP, thanks for being here, my man.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here.
So the way I'll start with is that spot where the priest said, what words would you want to be used to describe you if you were in that spot? So you come to the end of your days here. How would you want to be described by your friends and family in that location?
Yeah, I love that question, man. I really appreciate you sharing that story. Um, Grounded, deeply grounded. Um, Driven, clear, visionary, loving, connected, and I would say gentle.
Gentle is an interesting word,
Yeah.
considering your background, and it's interesting because there is this juxtaposition of that, even that word gentle, and how you grew up and what you did in your on your journey. So I find that interesting.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about where you bring us back to your spot in your younger days in school, and how you decided to go on the journey that you went to into the military.
Yeah. I'll take you guys on a ride here. So I actually was born and raised in San Juan, Puerto Rico. I was born there, and I lived there until I was about 12 years old. And then I moved to a little town called Feeding Hills, Massachusetts. And basically through my childhood, the reason why we moved to the States, there was a pretty big, I'm going to call it a legal issue my dad had through one of his businesses. And I don't know if you guys have ever been involved in any of that or know anybody who's ever been involved in something like that. It's a civil suit. And the way it went down was, it was like a year of litigation, going to court, all these different things. And ultimately he was found not guilty. But however, right, you spend a year paying for these things, your business tanks, you can't do anything. So that led us down a path of being very financially destitute, moving to the U.S., living in my friend of my dad's basement in his house in Feeding Hills. So, probably a couple grand. I don't even know if it was a grand or two, but very little amount of money that my mom had in hand. My dad stayed back in Puerto Rico to set things up, to close out the business so that we could move to the U.S. Classic, really that idea of the American dream, finding better opportunities, better jobs, etc. So that's how it started. And then in the ensuing years, I went to middle school. I guess it was junior high school, and then high school in the area. So I was what I like to call a cultural immigrant. I'm not an immigrant because I was a American citizen coming in, but I was a cultural immigrant. So like language was different, and I was shifting. My perspective is New England. New England and San Juan, Puerto Rico are very different places. So adjusting to that and understanding what any of that meant at the time as a kid, I was 12, and then growing up there, doing sports in school. Getting involved in languages. I was always been a big fan of languages. Started taking French back then. And then, during those years, there was a lot of growing pains of being an immigrant family in the place that we were financially at that time. We basically lived in a basement. Then, eventually, like 3 or 4 months later, got kicked out of the house for just arguments that we were having between the families. And that led to being homeless, living in motels, like Red Roofs Inn and Motel 6s and things like that for about a year. And then settling back and actually getting an apartment, kind of trying to grow as a family. So we had a few of those instances. I think I had in total 3 times that we had kind of dire financial circumstances as like my mom is changing careers. She used to be a secretary or executive assistant at the Supreme Court in Puerto Rico, and then with the language barrier and then coming to a whole new country, she had to really redesign what she could do. So it's just about, can I get a job here? And so she started as an assistant teacher, eventually became a teacher, and my dad was still an entrepreneur and a business coach. So he was, you guys are entrepreneurs, so you know how that life works. You're like trying to make it all work. And so that was sort of my teenage years. That's going on tumultuous in my household, and then I'm trying to adjust to the culture and going to high school and And so I actually didn't even hear about the military. Well, I'd heard about it. There were recruiters at my school, but it didn't really grab my attention until my senior year in high school. At the time I was wanting to go to college, and I just didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no idea where I was going to go. I just knew that whatever was happening at my house was not it. Like, I got to figure something out here. But I was also kind of a dreamy kid. I liked the arts. I was in, like I said, I was into languages. I was in drama clubs. So I was an actor, and I liked to sing. I was into that stuff, and I was also an athlete. I played, I ran track for my whole time in school, and I was into weightlifting. So I kind of had these two areas of my life. So a little bit of a nerd. I wore these like nerdy glasses, and I had kind of poofy hair, and I was in all my honors and AP classes, and so I had a bunch of these areas that I was playing with. And if anybody would have asked you if John Perez at that time was going to go in the military, they'd be like, "What? John Perez? What? No way! That guy's going to like art school or something." But it was my senior year, and I went to a it was like a college fair for his minority students. So a lot of the African Americans, East Asian, and then Latino kids in our school went to this community college where they had this college fair. And while I was there, this is probably like October of my senior year. So people are already applying to schools and stuff. And I'm like, what am I going to do? And I meet this guy. His name is John Jones. John Jones, if you're out there, hit me up. He was a lieutenant in the Navy, awesome guy, and he, was wearing the full whites, the Navy whites. You guys ever seen that in any of those movies? The long sleeves and whatever. And
Few Good
impressive
Men.
just to look
Few
at
Good
it.
Men comes to mind.
yeah, Few Good Men, exactly. That's the one.
Yeah.
Yep. And so he came up, or he was, at a booth, and I was walking around the other colleges. I noticed a lot of people were going over there. I think he was a little bit intimidating, just kind of what he was doing there. And I went over there and had a conversation, started talking about what the Naval Academy was. That's what he was representing. I was like, the Naval Academy? I never heard of that. And he started talking to me about, it's a college, it's a liberal arts school, and you can study, whatever, in the liberal arts realm that you want to. Study political science, study English, study whatever. And what really struck me was something that I didn't expect, and at the time it really drew me in. He started using words like leadership. Started using words like honor, commitment, service, and they'd kind of been around a little bit, but not really. At that time, they were completely foreign ideas and factors. That's not how I looked at the world at all. Like, up until then, it was about school, and then in my home life, it was like survival, like making this thing work. How do we do this? How do we make it in America, kind of thing. And so I was drawn by that, and I loved the idea of going to the school, and then the caveat or the bonus that it was paid for, right? You could go, and as long as you're accepted, you don't have to pay anything. The military pays for it. And I was like, holy shit, this is amazing. Like, my family doesn't have any money to send me to college. I don't know how, loans or any of that stuff. I didn't know how any of that stuff worked at the time. And so I was like, this is awesome. I can go to college. I can be a leader, and I can do this prestigious. At the time, I didn't realize the prestige of it yet. I hadn't really understood it because I didn't know anybody who went there. So it was more about like the values that they were espousing, like what they were embodying, and I was really, really drawn to it. So I applied, did like the preliminary application, started that process, and I was already really late to it. Like usually people start like the summer before or something. So this is October, and so the process of getting into the Naval Academy is like you have to get a nomination from a senator, a congressman, or I think the vice president or president. So it's a pretty small pool of people that you can get a nomination from. And usually you have to send them your information, and they do an interview, etc. And I was just really late to it, so I didn't have that opportunity. And so I was declined from my congressman at the time. And then the only person that would take my call was Senator Ted Kennedy's office in Boston. So he was at the time he was still alive. Basically I was like, I don't know how to do this. And I went to my guidance counselor. We had a conversation, and she got on the phone with me, and we got on the phone with his assistant at his job, who took care of all the nominations for the service academies. Did that part of it, and she just kind of spoke about my story and told her, like, hey, he's a good kid, he's got good grades, he comes from this background, like, I think he's a really good addition. And the deadline was past due, but she took it. She took my application without an interview, nothing. And so, roll the dice, here we go. I kept applying to schools and everything else, and then later on I found out, fast forward, I think this was in November, fast forward to April, I received a letter that I had been accepted to the preparatory school, the Naval Academy Prep School, which is in Rhode Island, in Newport, Rhode Island. So not exactly what I wanted, but I was so excited to go have an extra year of prep school before going there. And so that's where my journey started in the military. Navy Prep School in Newport, Rhode Island, and then a year there, and then a follow-on 4 years at the Naval Academy.
So the movie Few Good Men is one of my all-time favorite movies.
Yeah.
You know that, right? I'm picturing Nathan Jessup talking to Daniel Caffey the first time that we met, and Jessup is like, I eat breakfast 300 yards away from 100 soldiers who are trained to kill me. So don't think you're going to come in here, flash a badge, and make me nervous. It's good. Love it. That's what I was doing.
I was going to say, is that what you were writing down when you had that?
I want you to stand here in your faggoty white uniform and extend me some fucking courtesy. That's what he says. It's one of my all-time favorite movies. The end of that movie is absolutely tremendous. So, yeah. As you were talking, JP, I want to go back and unpack a little bit the trauma that you experienced growing up as a middle school principal. There were times in my career that I needed to understand what was going on in homes where a family became homeless, and just the traumatic experience that must have been like for you at several times where your father may or may not have been there. He might have been taking care of business in Puerto Rico, and you were there with your mother, and everything that was going on there. How did that impact you as a student? You mentioned it was middle into high school that was going on. How did that impact you at that time, having to deal with everything at home and trying to, and we know as middle school students, you have to,
or even like a social life too.
Yeah, exactly. Talk to us a little bit about that experience first.
Yeah, of course. So I actually came into my region called it, they had middle school and junior high school. So junior high was 7th and 8th, but
right.
Anyway, same concept. I was surprisingly really, I don't remember if it was because I was just simply a good student, quote unquote. I just liked being there. Like, I enjoyed school. I didn't enjoy the concept of school, but I liked learning. Like, I didn't like the class, 50 minutes, bell, 10 minutes break, go to the next class. And there were a couple of things. First, that was just my own, how I was as a kid, and then the other piece was there was a lot of pressure from my parents as well to succeed. Part of it was, and I'd love to talk about it later as well, but the kind of good boy syndrome. Like, I was the eldest of me and my brothers, just like you guys were always riffing and kind of getting on each other's nerves when we were kids. And so I was the eldest. I was the eldest in my cousins, and there was a lot of expectation when we came to the U.S. And I spoke pretty good English already when I came here, so it was a lot of pressure from home. Like, you need to succeed, and I knew there was a lot of it's a no-fail mission. My dad used to say something like that when we were kids. So. I think it was partly I was interested in the topics, certain of them. It was America, it was new, it was exciting, English. Like, I was listening and learning all these things. And then at the same time, there was a lot of pressure from home to succeed. So I would say it's a combination of those things.
JP, you mentioned the that good boy syndrome. Definitely hit home with me. And I also think about birth order. You know, I see all these funny memes where they have where the oldest son he comes back and he's like, I just counted, there are 37 windows in this household, and the youngest is jumping out of the window to go outside and run around naked, and that's what
he's covered in butter and fucking
Yeah.
But you also mentioned the way that schools were set up. You had a 15-minute class, you had a break, you moved on to the next class for 50 minutes. We talk a lot about school and education on this podcast, and they're not synonymous. Schooling and education are vastly different. And you had this will to learn, and you wanted to learn, but the way schools were set up maybe didn't provide that opportunity the way that it could have or should have even. If you could go back to that time in your life and adjust the way that schools were set up, it could be the structure, the flow of the day, or even just what you were learning in school at that time, how would you change your experience in that junior high school into high school time frame?
I would say I would make school later, first and foremost. Like, I think we started at like 7 a.m., which is insane now that I think about it. Like, we woke up at something like 5:30 or 5:45. Like, mom was cooking breakfast, and then it's off to school. So I would definitely say start later, 9, 10 in the morning. And then I would create a system, if it were possible, to have a lot less structure in terms of what classes you have to take, and more allowing kids to, create like, 3 basic things like math and a science and a language, something like that. And everything else could be a little bit more exploratory about what you want to study. Definitely take out those hard, I don't know if you guys had them, but the hard desks that were connected with that metal bar next to it.
Yeah, dude, absolutely.
Oh,
they were
hate
the worst.
those things.
And they were geared for righties too. And we have a lefty in our family. Our sister Megan is a lefty. My daughter Sophia is a lefty. You're out there on your own. Your left elbow's kind of flopping around in the breeze.
And there's also enough gum underneath all of those desks. Like, people they've been stuck there for like decades of just dirty gum underneath those hard desks.
Right.
Oh, that was the worst.
So your structure then. So I like that idea of one less challenging structurally desk to set up.
Yeah, I think that's a good starting point.
It's a good start. So even the physical structure.
I think some schools do that already. Like, they have, probably not public schools as much. This is my assumption. But probably some of the private schools and the what are those schools called when you
so there's charter schools.
Charter schools. Yep. That's what I'm thinking of. Yeah. Smaller groups, more discussion than just lecture. If I'm 12 or 13, like, why are you lecturing to me? This is not a great way for kids to learn. Like, should be 15 minutes of an introduction and then go like test it out. Here's some exercises. So I do a lot more of that for sure.
I tell teachers all the time as I work with them, if you could say something in 37 words, don't use 622. Be more succinct.
Yeah.
Understand the premise of brevity as you're speaking to kids. They're going to stop listening to you after the 37th word anyway. So be really impactful and cognizant of the language that you're using. So before we close the loop on that, you mentioned there should be some type of a language, some type of math, perhaps a science. What was a course that you wish you had in school that would benefit you tremendously now as an adult?
Ooh, that's a really interesting question. Let's see. Honestly, if I could go back to high school, I would teach like the very basic fundamentals of business. And I don't mean like start your own business right at the high school kind of thing. I mean like a business 101. Here's how businesses work in general. And I say that now, even in the military, it would have been more helpful to understand how organizations are structured, and particularly as businesses, because I think it's something that it permeates like almost all of our lives. I mean, a hospital is a business, like almost everything is a form of business. So introducing that and then zooming out into the larger context of like, what is a business, and then how does it play into how are you going to be in the world? Because I think that would have given a lot of us some grounding, honestly, like, oh, okay, I understand what a business is. Cool. What kind of business do I want to be in? Or if I don't want to be in a business, something like the military or the Peace Corps, something like that, still understand that it operates under some of those basic principles of a business.
You talked to us about your journey, and you left off. You spoke with your counselor. You met the John Jones.
John Jones.
John L. Jones.
John
yep.
L. Jones.
Yep.
Do you know what the L stood for?
No idea.
Oh man, it's so good. I listened to the Santi interview this morning about middle names.
I believe, not 100% sure. I'm like 40% sure about this. It was Lee, because he was
John Lee Jones.
John, Jesus.
He was an Asian American. Yeah.
That's a powerful name, though.
John Lee Jones. That's a powerful name. I know.
John Lee Jones.
Yeah.
And I love the L. I love the.
I wish,
Anthony L. J. Morales. It doesn't do the same thing.
It's all terrible.
Doesn't.
It's all bad.
Yeah.
But so now you've had these two individuals in your life. You had John L. Jones. You had the counselor who took rolled the dice, took a gamble on you and what you were going to be capable of. So now you enter the armed forces. Talk to us about that experience, and then take us on that journey from there to how you decided to start the Rising Warrior or become involved with the Rising Warrior. Yeah,
absolutely. I want to shout out one other person that really supported me in that journey. His name is Bob Kaline. He was my blue and gold officer. So the Naval Academy has these kind of representatives who are just regional that get people into the application process. And he was an unbelievably helpful and powerful person in my life. So just wanted to cover that, because I see him almost every year for he does like reunions of all of us that got into the Naval Academy through his help. So put that out there. Bob, I love you. Thank you so much. So Navy prep school, then the Naval Academy. Went to the Naval Academy for 4 years. Studied political science and a minor in French. So I kept the French going all the way from junior high school, which was awesome, by the way. It was one of the cheat codes at a service academy. When you do a language, you get to travel too. So I did that language, and I got to go to France for it was a month-long, completely paid for trip over there. And all I literally did was learn a language there. So I just went to class 3 hours a day and then hung out in Paris for a month. It was amazing. And then I got to go later as a senior for a semester at, I'm going to say this in French, École Quétidienne Saint-Cyr. So it was like the French version of West Point. So they're a military school. I got to do that, which was really eye-opening about how other militaries in the world work. Super powerful experience, and really fun too. So studied political science, did that at the Naval Academy. And while I'm there, you do what's called service selection. You decide what you want to do in either the Navy or the Marine Corps. So you can do submarines, surface warfare, EOD, SEALs, aviation. So you can be a Navy pilot, or you can be a Marine ground or Marine air. So you get your pick of the litter. And there's a few jobs there for restricted line, engineering, information warfare. There's a couple other kind of smaller portions of the Navy. So you're going to commission as an officer, and I commissioned in 2014 as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps. What the Marine Corps meant to me that was different from the Navy, which interestingly enough was less business-like than the Navy. There was what I felt at the time that really struck with me was a lot more camaraderie. There was a level of people were more motivated to do the mission. That was my perception at the time. They were driven, they were tough, they were badass dudes and gals, and there was this picture of I don't know if you guys have ever seen the commercials, but even while I was at the Naval Academy, I would watch them, and it would be like a Marine in training or in combat or something, and at the end it would be like, we don't offer you a college degree or any of this shit. Like, I forget what the lines were, but there was something around like, take on the challenge. Like, are you ready for this? Can you do this? It was more like challenging than like join our thing because we'll pay for your college. And that part, now that I understand a little bit about marketing, I see how powerful it was. But that message that the Marine Corps was really honing in on, and then my own desire to have this kind of bonded, genuine brotherhood and to be a genuine leader in the way that I understood it at that time is what drew me into the Marine Corps. So did this training between my junior year and senior year called Leatherneck, which is like our condensed version of Officer Candidate School, OCS. Got selected to be a Marine that fall. Got selected to be a Marine pilot, actually, originally. And then right as I was about to graduate, got disqualified from it. I had asthma as a kid, and I had no issues that were present at the time, but I didn't meet some kind of threshold. So anyway, that went out the wayside. And one of the really interesting parts of my journey was that right as I was about to commission, I remember the day specifically. I would believe it was March 31st of my senior year. We're doing practicums, so it's our final. We're about to get into the Marine Corps, so they make sure you do a semester of. It's like a combination of leadership training and then actual tactics, Marine tactics. So. Infantry platoon tactics, just kind of the very, very basic. So we were doing a land navigation course. I don't know if you guys are familiar to that with land nav, but just kind of learning how to use a map and a compass and find boxes in the woods. That's like the basics of it. And it was a rainy day. We're out there doing land nav. It was our final exercise. It was our final test. And I'm walking through the woods. I'm like literally on the way to my first box. And this is like a 4-hour event. You have to find, I think it was like 8 boxes. My first box, and I'm going down this kind of trail, heavily. It was in the spring, so it was still a little chilly. It was rainy, and there's all these leaves everywhere. And I start coming down this tiny little kind of hill. And as I'm coming down, I do the side shimmy, where you kind of slide, try to slide down the hill.
Yeah.
And boom, my foot gets stuck in the mud. I didn't see this mud beneath the leaves. But my body's still moving forward with like the pack I'm wearing. So as I'm coming over, my fibula, which I found out later, my ankle breaks. Boom, pop, and I'm on the ground screaming for dear life. And luckily we had been trained, so we had our little whistle, blew on my whistle, and somebody came to help me out. A couple guys brought me to the road. I went to the hospital. It turns out I broke my fibula and I tore all the ligaments in my ankle. And so the journey to the Marine Corps was a lot more difficult than I had originally imagined, because now I have a broken foot and I'm about 2 months from graduation. I have to get surgery, physical therapy. It's a pretty intense break. And then as I'm going through that process, I found out that I can't be a pilot anymore. So that was really, at the time, sucked. In hindsight, it was really powerful and helpful that worked out that way. But at the time, I was fucking devastated. So, it's about April at that point. May is when graduation is. So this is all happening. Like, broke my leg, found out I couldn't commission as a pilot. Then I got another email that said you actually can't commission. You have to delay your commissioning because you're not 100% fit to commission on that date. I think it was May 25th, something like that. So you have to delay your graduation until such time that you could pass the physical exam. So now I'm like, this is finals week, by the way. So I'm taking all my tests. So this is what's happening. And then fast forward to graduation week, and I was able to, at that time, get off the cast, and I had the soft cast, and I was going to walk. They actually allowed me to walk. They said, hey, you can't commission, but you've been here 4 years. Like, we're not going to take this away from you and your family. We're going to let you dress. You could put on the rank and everything. You could have the whole ceremony, but afterwards you have to take it off because you're not actually commissioned. So commissioned that day, or graduated that day. So I had my diploma, but I didn't have my commission. So I was a super senior for until July, 3 months. So that summer was basically just rehab and working at the international programs office at the Naval Academy. So working with a lot of the kids that were traveling abroad, just like I did. That's where the journey started into the Marine Corps. Started the basic school, which is the first school out of the in the Marine Corps, in December. So I took all that period to heal. Commissioned in July 29th, and then I went to school in December to go to the basic school, which is where they teach Marines, Marine officers, all Marine officers, pilots included, basic infantry platoon tactics. Then from there, I got selected to be a logistics officer. So at the basic school, you get to choose, once again, it's another selection. Between all the ground MOSs, all the jobs you can do in the Marine Corps, you have to choose what you want. And then it's a randomized selection process. And I became a logistics officer in North Carolina, is where the school's at. Did that for 3 months. And then my actual duty station was 29 Palms, California, out in the desert in California. That was I've checked into my first unit November of 2015.
Building men of character, integrity, strength, compassion, and empathy through transformational mentoring, coaching, and motivational speaking is our mission here at Building Men. To work with me as a one-on-one life coach, you can find information in the show notes, or you can visit our website at buildingmen.io, where you can book a free 30-minute discovery call to help you become the strongest version of yourself mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. Now, back to the show. As you were talking, JP, I was thinking Matthew Markinson and Jonathan Kendrick from A Few Good Men. When they have Kendrick up on the stand, he says the 4 things are honor, code, God, and country, or honor, core, God, country. Is that what you hear? Was that legit? Was Kendrick was saying in the Marines?
Yeah,
you hear honor, core. Is it core, honor, core, God, country?
Yeah, I don't remember the God being in there, but definitely honor, core, country for sure.
Okay, maybe Kendrick just threw that in there.
yeah, for dramatic effect.
Yeah.
Kiefer Sutherland, he was so good in that role. Oh my God, it's my favorite movie.
I can tell you're getting giddy right now. That injury, that just, when you mentioned that, it just brought me back, because I broke my leg when I was 19 and had the same thing, except I wasn't in the Marine Corps. And I wasn't,
Your story involves alcohol, a hangover.
I mean, I was probably hungover, but I was just running to go pet my friend's dog, and I slipped on ice, and then my foot caught like the pavement. It was like a small patch of ice, and all 230 pounds of me just rolled over my leg, and I broke my fibula, my tibia, and then the ligaments in I had the same thing, except I had a tibia too on top of that, so I win.
Yeah, so you know that length of process of recovery.
Yeah, and that's why when you're talking about it, like, you have to do some serious rehab for that. I mean, just to be able to, I was in a wheelchair, I couldn't even put any pressure on it. Like, it was, so I can't even imagine what that experience was like in itself. But going back to the Marine Corps, like you said, you're very, you're into theater, you're into, performing arts, like all this stuff. Like, did you feel like you had to really sacrifice that authentic part of you to be able to be successful in the Marine Corps? Like, what was that like? And did you feel like you're kind of giving up a part of you? Like, are you giving up who JP really is? And what did that feel like?
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. There was a lot of that. I was aware of it, but I wasn't aware of how much it would impact me over the years. I didn't realize how it would lead to a lot of depression, anxiety, and a lack of meaning later on in my life. My time in the Marine Corps, but at the time I was so involved in being a Marine. Like, I wanted to be a badass motherfucker. I wanted to be a leader. Like, this was my shit. I was focused on what I was doing, and it was just, I don't know. My experience was, I'm going through training. This is going to take some grit. It's going to take a lot of focus. And, there was a part of me that at the time thought, I can put some of that stuff behind me. Like I didn't become whatever, an artist or a performer. None of those things that kind of I was interested in before. This is my new identity. Like I'm a Marine now. This is what I do, and it's very much how we're taught to do. Like you put on the uniform, and it's not just putting on a uniform. It's putting on an identity. It's putting on a version of you that in many ways leaves behind the versions of you that you were before. It's almost a requirement of the job. So, I don't know that I noticed right away the effect of it, but there was some parts of me that I wasn't as expressive. I didn't do as much, I wasn't going to France and hanging out with a bunch of, people in Paris or whatever, or hanging out by the Seine drinking wine and playing guitar. Like I wasn't doing any of those things anymore. I was fucking intensely focused on being a leader and succeeding at this program, or the several different training programs before I got to the fleet. So I think at the time the effect wasn't quite, I hadn't quite understood what it would be to let those parts of myself go. I was completely bought into this is what a Marine officer does, and this is who I'm going to be.
Do you think that contributed to, you mentioned you dealt with depression, anxiety for a period of time. Do you feel that had a direct correlation to that? You feeling like you needed to be this badass motherfucking Marine and sound like it needed to look a certain way, but inside of you there was this other part of you that was like, I want to, play guitar and eat baguettes and, paint and do whatever. Do you think that contributed to it?
100%. Yep. I would say it's one of the many factors, right? You already have, we talk about this, but we carry a lot of trauma already from our childhood, from being homeless, from people yelling in my house, from the chaos of not having enough money. All these things now compounded by like an intense version of hyper masculinity that was supporting this type of identity as a Marine officer. So, it did lead to eventually so much suppression of that, what you just said, like eating baguettes, playing guitar, hanging out. It was, entertainment or play or fun became like drinking or partying or going out or fucking, getting into fights when you're drinking, like, all these different, or the type of working out where you're constantly pushing yourself and grinding and hustling, those things is what permeated a lot of my reality at the time in the Marine Corps. And yeah, I to answer your question, that process was definitely, it was like a suppressing series of factors that was like a what I think a lot of us struggle with in the military, especially when we leave, is you've been kind of turned into this one version of you, this one probability of your personality, drilled it in for years and years, and then all of those other aspects, you haven't even touched them for years. And so you're left with this sense of fatigue, this sense of depression, this sense of, holy shit, this cannot be what life is about. Like, I like leading, I like being a Marine, I like some of these things, but I'm completely trapped in this identity that I created for myself.
And so it's funny because until you actually spoke about it, I had no idea that you were in the military or anything. And just when we were at our retreat together, people don't know, I went to training camp for the soul, and that's where I met JP for the first time. And I would describe him as, without knowing any of his background, I would say he was playful, free-spirited. He was funny. He was like just this person that you just want to be around. He just emulated just so much energy and just like, again, like very go with the flow type of person. And there was nothing about you that I felt like was how I would describe someone in the military, as like rigid, intimidating, this person that I'm like, holy crap, don't fuck with this guy. And all of a sudden you just like, kind of like slowly mention that you power clean like 350 pounds or whatever it was. And I'm like, oh, okay. Holy fuck. But was there a moment that when you were out of the military, maybe you were in the military, where you were like, what made you want to start looking into this more? Like that you realized that you were becoming someone that maybe you didn't necessarily like, or you were suppressing who you really are. Was there something that opened up your eyes to it, or some sort of moment that in time where you were like, I need to change, or what made you look inward more?
Yeah, absolutely, man. So, I'll start with where I was stationed. I was stationed in the desert, 29 Palms, California. It's right next to Joshua Tree, if you guys are familiar with the area. High desert, summers are like 120 degrees, and winters, get pretty cold. You actually get down in the 30s. And it's pretty desolate. It's not a lot going on. There's the national park, and there's people who come in to see the national park, and then there's the base, and pretty much all that's going on there is the national park and the base. There's really not that much else going on in the area. So, what that led to after, for me, it was about 3.5 years, 2 years, 2 to 2.5 years of me being in the desert and being a Marine and doing all this stuff. It starts to wear on you. First of all, you're in your mid-20s, so you're kind of excited to be in the world. I traveled a bunch before, and I was excited to be in the fleet. Part of it was the adventure of it. And I didn't get that, right? I was stationed there in the desert, training all the time. We were really good at what we were doing. We were absolutely well prepared to go to war. And I wasn't exposed to a lot of other things. So in that, dealing with that, and then after a while of like really getting depressed in that space of suppressing my emotions, suppressing who I was, and then plus all this training in the desert, it led to a lot of introspection. There were a lot of freaking time in the desert, a lot of time, and very quiet. It's not at all like what I live now. It's so still, and so there was a lot of time for me to do a lot of self-reflection and asking myself, like, is this what I want out of life? Like, do I want to be doing this? Like, I'm proud of my service, and I look back and I do think, at that time in my life, I was like, this isn't how I wanted it to go. This is not the vision I have of an adventurous, life of, intrigue and like exploring what was out there. I was in this little sandbox playing Marine, and I wasn't enjoying it anymore. So, I was always interested in like getting down to the deeper layers of things. So I was, listening to one of my mentors now, Mike Bledsoe, kind of tangentially, I was also doing CrossFit at the time. So I did that for 3 or 4 years, and, listening to all these different fitness podcasts, and Mike Bledsoe out there, he's a veteran, Navy veteran, and he's talking about psychedelics, and he's talking about all these like out of the box things that I was like, what? How did this guy get into all this stuff? And I'm so I'm like, I'm in the car going to my CrossFit gym after being on base, like doing all this work, listening to this guy talk about all this different rabbit holes that he's been in. I am so fascinated by it. Him and among some other ideas I followed. I don't know if you're familiar with Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. But I started diving into those areas as well, like kind of getting into comparative mythology and psychology through Carl Jung. And I started just exploring the mind more and understanding. I wanted to know myself. I wanted to understand myself better. And like, what is this thing I'm feeling that people are calling depression? So that's where my sort of surf exploration started. And then as I was introduced to psychedelics in an idea, I started reading about it. And I haven't shared this publicly before, but I was still in my final year in the military, and I actually, a neighbor of mine, offered me to do mushrooms, psilocybin, and we went out to the desert one Sunday, and I mean, truly paradigm shifting experience. Like, I was in the military. I didn't know any of these things. This was completely foreign. I'd never really done, broken any rules. Like I was like I said earlier, the good boy. Like I was, Marine captain. I was doing my job. This is what you do. This is how you succeed, etc. And all of a sudden it was like boom, like explosion of consciousness. Like, what the fuck is this? So that opened my world completely. Not to mention that I'd already been exploring some of these other things, and so, that was the first like kind of inkling. Like, there's more to reality than what you think there is, and it was a process the next year of like me processing it, realizing what happened. I didn't know what to do with that information. But anyway, that's the seed that was planted. I knew I was going to, at that point, for sure, I was like, I'm leaving the Marine Corps. I'm going to do something else. I just don't know what. Then this is where it gets really interesting. The summer, I did a thing called the Corporate Fellowship Program, which is basically you go to a corporation for 3 months. You're still in the military technically, but you're on temporary duty. My last 3 months in the military were actually in New York City working at HuffPost, the Huffington Post of all the places. And so I worked there as on the strategy team. I was really just kind of a strategy consultant. They didn't really have a role for me, so I was really just kind of understanding like how the newsroom worked, how they managed projects, how they created content, how they had funding and advertisement, all that stuff. So I was completely removed from the desert and like boom, set into New York City, like in the middle of chaos, having those experiences, and that was a really, again, a powerful experience of expansion where all of a sudden I'm in the middle of a city learning about media. Like and it was fast. It was primarily like female environment. I think it was like 75% women who worked at HuffPost, and I had this experience where I'm like hyper masculine to like hyper feminine environment, and I get these giant shifts, and I'm there working there, and I realized like at the time I didn't want to be in like corporate anything. So I'm like, I'm out of here. Like, this has been a cool experience, but I am not interested in any of this stuff. So the journey then takes me to this is when I started really daydreaming and planning. I sold my car while I was in the desert, and then I took all my savings and I planned a 1-year Euro trip, backpacking in Europe by myself, solo trip. And so I only ended up doing 3 months, luckily, because of COVID later. I ended up doing only 3 months in Europe, backpack there, started in Spain, went to England, and then Ireland. Super incredible experience. Again, I'm like middle of the desert, New York City chaos, like, okay, cool, I don't want to be corporate, but I'm learning all these things about life. And then all of a sudden I'm like thrust into the world by myself with a backpack. And this is when the artistic stuff that I talked about earlier starts coming back. I start writing poetry. I start taking long ass walks. I start growing my hair out. I stopped cutting my hair at the time. I got a tattoo. I was really out there experimenting with life and in adventuring in the way that I'd wanted to, like completely no rules, like staying in hostels, like going all over the place, going to concerts, enjoying myself. And that progression is when, in that period, is when I started to ask the big questions again, like, what is my purpose? Like, why doesn't this feel meaningful? Like, I love doing this, but it doesn't feel meaningful right now. What is my purpose in all this? Why am I doing this? And so as I'm traveling, those questions are also happening. And then my journey ended up taking me to, I wanted to expand kind of my art form, and I had an idea of like, okay, maybe it was art. Maybe I missed something when I was 17 or 18. Maybe I went to the military and I forsook, a whole part of me. Maybe I got to get it back. And so I was inspired, and I moved to Austin, Texas in 3 months later, so in November, and I got a guitar teacher, and that's all I did. I had money enough to like pay rent, take guitar classes, and just dive into poetry and guitar, and that was it. That journey kind of evolved, and I met a guy at a friend's birthday party that led me into working as a lacrosse coach. So I played lacrosse at the Naval Academy. I think I missed that earlier, but a high school lacrosse coach from like January all the way to June, in the middle of the pandemic as well. So, again, another huge shift in identity and in perspective. And now all of a sudden I'm coaching again, which I love. I love leading. I love coaching people. And so it's a part of me that I'd sort of left behind as I was traveling. Now I've added this like art, piece of it. I'm playing guitar. I'm writing poetry. I'm now coaching again. And I'm starting to build this like, okay, this is awesome. I feel way more fulfilled than I ever have, but there's still those questions, those pressing questions. And And, as I was coaching, the pandemic happened, and I ended up doing the Strong Coach. That was, again, Mike Bledsoe's company. Did that for a few months, and I go into the Strong Coach with this idea of starting a strength and conditioning business for lacrosse players. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm out of options in Austin. Like, there's the jobs are drying up. There's this thing called the pandemic. Like, no one's ever heard of it since 1917. And I'm like, holy shit, the world is falling apart. I just got out of the military. What the hell am I going to do? I'm making basically no money, like $1,200 a month coaching lacrosse. So I'm like, all right, this obviously isn't working. I want to have my own place. I want to create my own life. And at the time, I'm living with roommates in Austin, coaching lacrosse. And so I'm doing the Strong Coach, and I'm like, okay, one of the things that we started talking about is this is where like the connecting file between what I'd been doing in exploring psychology, depth psychology, and psychedelics and all that stuff that I've been into, and a lot of poetry about meaning and purpose, connecting with the program and the Strong Coach, and they start talking about language. They start talking about beliefs, my beliefs around money, your beliefs around your worthiness. And I'm like, what the fuck? I'd never heard this. Like, so there's all these underlying beliefs that are limiting what people can do because they think they can't. And I was like, holy shit. So one of the first limiting beliefs was around making six figures. I thought like that was this like an unreachable ceiling that I could never get, even after being in the military. For whatever reason, it's just a story I had in my head. So that one, I cut right to it. And I ended up taking a job in D.C., actually, where I live now, as a management consultant for a big consulting firm. And that was a really powerful experience. Once again, another big shift. Now I'm in a corporate environment as I finish up the Strong Coach, because I was interested and passionate about learning about business. Like, I wanted to know more. And at the time, I was, if I'm being totally honest, I was scared. I was scared as shit. I was like, I'm not making any money. I'm in Austin. I'm in a place I don't know. I don't have a real community. I started building a small community, but it hadn't really materialized yet. So I was like, I don't really have an attachment to here. My family lives in Massachusetts. My friends are all over the place. They're either still in the military or they just got out and they are themselves figuring out what to do next. And I was like, safety. I want safety. Like, I need to like get into business and like, create a structure and make six figures. So in a way, I like busted through that limiting belief of not making enough money. And at the same time, I fell back into patterns of big corporate, massive organizational environments with lots of rules and regulations and things you can and can't do. So that area, in those ensuing months started creating a lot of tension because I found myself in, it was management consulting for defense contractors, we were the defense contracts for agencies here in DC. And so I'm now in a world again where like I'm sort of tapping back into that like defense military kind of mindset on the business side of it with all this information and new energy and understanding around beliefs, around language work, around like who do you want to be in the world, what is fulfilling to you that I learned in the Strong Coach. And I'm completely like, there's turmoil in my heart and soul and mind. Like, I'm like, in one hand, I'm doing well financially. I'm crushing it. I've got a nice car. I've got my own apartment. This is going great. And on the other hand, I don't believe in what I'm doing. It's not connecting with me. I'm completely, disconnected from my soul, from my heart. So these things are at the forefront of what is in front of my mind. And that's when I joined TCS. In November of last year, 2020. And that was the beginning of a beautiful fucking journey that has been the last year of my life of really getting down to the center, getting down to the core. I think that whole story answers your question.
So then talk to us a little bit about, real quickly, how do you then take that idea, what you did in the military, your background, your artistic nature, training camp for the soul, that masculine, feminine journey you've been on, the dichotomy there as well, to create or be involved with Rising Warrior. So talk to us a little bit about Rising Warrior now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the Rising Warrior was started by Lance Davis, and then partnered with Sean Lazio later on, and I joined them because they had done TCS years before, and Sean had done those TCS Mastery the previous year before me. So I finished TCS. I ended up being coached by Sean at the time during my integration for a few months before I started my own mastery program. So during my mastery program, they did a beta program for the Rising Warrior program. They did their first 90-day beta program, and I took part in it as a student. Basically, I just they wanted me, and I wanted to observe the course. And then as that has developed over time, we've really just crafted on. Lance had been working on this for years, but we realized that we had a really powerful connection, the three of us, and we wanted to start what we looked at what was out there for transitioning veterans and first responders as well. It didn't really exist. There was a lot of programs out there, there's a lot of nonprofit organizations that deal with PTSD and trauma and all these different things that happen acutely in the military. And then there's the VA that provides medical services, et cetera. But there wasn't this self-development course specifically geared towards veterans and first responders that tailored, the message to them. And so our mission is to bring a lot of these self-development elements, this spiritual development, this connecting to your heart, understanding what it really means to thrive and find fulfillment in your life, and create a program specifically for that community to give back to to where we come from. So that's where it started.
It's tremendous, and it's such a needed thing. It really is, and what you're doing is you're integrating everything you've gone through in your life and truly moving towards that purpose in your life. And I think the synergistic nature of it with the training camp for the soul, with helping veterans understand, and I'll bring it all the way back to the beginning about grief and how men handle grief. And my last question to you, and then I'll turn it over to Anthony, would be, from your experience helping veterans, helping first responders, dealing with mourning, with grief, is there any piece of advice that you might offer to someone that's experiencing that right now or has recently experienced it that could help bring them through a difficult situation?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think my experience through TCS and some of the other work I've done is that, like any emotion, grief is something that needs to be completely felt all the way through. Holding on to it, bottling it up, creating tension around it is just going to create conflict in your life. It's going to create negative consequences both in your body and in your experiences with your community, with your relationships. So allowing yourself to be with it. We talk about this at the retreat and during TCS as well, Anthony knows as well, is really just allowing all of it. Like, if you're grieving something, cry it out, write it out, allow yourself to really be with that sensation all the way through the end of it. And what's possible afterwards is a sense of bliss, a sense of completeness, a sense of groundedness.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Brother?
That resonates with me. So my last question would be, if we like to ask all of our guests this just as a quick takeaway, something that people can kind of take home from this whole conversation. You went through a lot of different things and a lot of different experiences. So if someone was to wake up tomorrow, what's something they could do immediately to start making a change or kind of start going down that path that they need to? What's one thing they can do when they wake up tomorrow morning?
The most powerful tool for me over these last couple of years has been journaling. I don't need to teach you how to journal. You don't need to learn breath work. You don't need to learn ice baths. You don't need to learn any of those things. You can pick up a piece of paper and write out what's in your mind. Knowing what is there for you, sifting through it, understanding it is one of the most powerful tools that I've found. I think everybody can do that every day to get clearer. Yeah, what's really going on in my head? What's really going on in my heart? What's happening within me that I'm not allowing to express?
So on behalf of John L. Jones, I want to thank John Perez Cruz for being on the podcast. How could the Building Men audience find you, your journey, your mission?
Yeah, beautiful, man. So at John D. Perez Cruz on Instagram and on Facebook, and then at the.rising.warrior on Instagram, Facebook as well, and then at therisingwarrior.com. So, come check us out if you're a first responder or a veteran, if you're interested in any we talked about today.
Yeah, and if you're listening and you know anyone that has gone through something like that, please share this episode with them where that they can find JP and they can find his mission. Any idea of what I wrote down for the title of this episode, just as a joke title? Do you have any idea what I wrote down?
It's got to be something with A Few Good Men, I'm assuming.
Well, I actually went with penis envy and the explosion of consciousness.
That's perfect.
That's what I'm writing as you're talking. I think I'm writing these deep things. I wrote penis envy and the explosion.
I knew once he said that like triggered something. I know.
I was gonna write that down. And then I was like the part in A Few Good Men when he's like, you want answers, and Kathy's like, I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. It's like the most amazing line.
It is the most amazing line.
God. And just the being able to have a spot to say that on the podcast, I wanted to be able to do that.
Maybe we'll start the episode with a clip from there or something like that.
Real quick, where you can find Building Men is building.men on Instagram. buildingmencoach@gmail.com is our email address. Our website is buildingmen.io. Before we go, we end Building Men. I typically say go one step further than you thought you can go. Can you say that in French for us?
Oh,
putting you on the spot there. You could say anything.
I'm blanking out.
You could say
anything. Made something up, and we were yeah. He said you have a tiny penis, and we're like, and that's right. You heard it here.
You heard it here first. He knows what he's talking about. That's tremendous. Well, thank you, JP. Truly appreciate it. Go one step further than you thought you could go. We'll see you next time on Building Men.